Hello, everybody out there in Facebook land. Randy Sullivan coming to you live from the Whiskey Cave. I guess it's not actually live. I decided that I needed to distribute the information that's going to be in this video in, multiple different locations. So I thought it'd just be better to host it on my upcoming YouTube channel. So, as you know, I'm about to launch my podcast, Bourbon Real Talk. And the channel's live, but doesn't have any of the content on it yet because the things that I've recorded have not been edited so that I can put them up there, but it's coming. But this couldn't wait. So I've started to notice that there's been a shift in my palate. And that's come as a result of some of these Bourbon Real Talk recordings that I've done because I've been lucky enough to participate in several barrel picks lately from local Texas distilleries. And through that process, I was able to interview either the master distiller or the distillery manager at several locations. And I learned an awful lot about what's going on in Texas whiskey. And I realized that I, like many people, had a lot of misconceptions. And I would like to take this opportunity to pass some of that information along. So one of the things that I realized was that there was a time not too long ago when brands like Pappy Van Winkle or other ultra premium releases like Old Forester Birthday Bourbon or BTAC just sat on the shelves and you could go in and get it anytime that you wanted. But as the bourbon craze started to take off, that started to shift, and eventually people switched from trying to go in and collect ultra premium bourbons all the way to the point that, first ultra premium bourbons started to get semi-rare, then they got really rare, and then it started to move into lower tier products that weren't really considered ultra premium, and then those got rare, and then they got really rare, and then it went to, okay, well, any store pick. And so now store picks are oversubscribed, almost like you're going to get, BTAC at Christmas. And so seeing this trend, people are looking for more new places that they can get premium whiskeys that are exciting and fun to drink and share, because ultimately I think that's what all of us want to do with our whiskey is, use it to have social interactions, or at least that's what most of the people that I spend time with use it for. But keep in mind that it wasn't that long ago that Scotch was considered the only good whiskey in the world. Like, if gentlemen didn't drink Scotch. So if you were to offer a gentleman a bourbon, you would have been looked down upon maybe as early as 20 or 30 years ago. But that's no longer the case. And the reason why that shifted is Scotch tastes very different from the Kentucky bourbons that you and I are used to drinking. But people had trained their palates to think that whiskey was supposed to taste like Scotch. And as a result, if you gave them a whiskey that didn't taste like Scotch, then they didn't like it. It wasn't that it didn't taste good. And that's the point that I'm driving at. So I've seen this happen in the whiskey world before. I've seen it happen in the wine world. There's a whole movie made about something they called the Judgment of Paris. And they did a blind tasting in Paris, and California wines were submitted. And until the California wines beat all the French wines, no one believed that good wine could be made outside of France and Italy. And obviously that has completely shifted. But when you first, even today, people who like French wines, when they taste California wines, they're like, oh, they're over extracted. They're too fruity. They're too sweet. They taste like they have sugar in them compared to the earthy, funky flavors that you get out of, say, a Bordeaux wine from France. So, but now people are starting to understand that, no, it's supposed to taste different. It's from a different region. And it's even happened in the craft beer world. If you went back in time and took a double IPA and handed it to somebody who was used to drinking Coors, they would have spit it out. They would not have thought that it tasted good at all. And so I've seen this transition happen in other beverage industries, and I feel like it's coming to the bourbon world, or at least the U.S. whiskey market. So even, I don't know, not that long ago, 3 weeks ago, if you'd had asked me, which Texas distilleries do you like? And I go, well, I really don't drink those. And I'd say, they're too sweet, that blue corn flavor, it's too much for me, blah, blah, blah. But I've started to get educated, and again, that's why I want to pass this information along. So one of the things that I discovered as I started to go through this process was that everything is different about how they make whiskey in Texas than how they make whiskey in Kentucky. So first off, let's start off with the grain. So most Texas distilleries use some varietal of an heirloom corn in their production process. If you've ever seen it, you know, it's like the blue corn, it's different colors. I took a picture of a kernel or a cob of corn at Iron Root Distillery when I was there because it was literally so beautiful. It looked like art. It looked like jewelry. Um, when I look at the photo, I'm like, did I put a filter on this? I didn't. It's just beautiful. And one of the things that I found out was that most distilleries like to use locally sourced grains, and in Kentucky and in Texas. But in Texas, the locally sourced heirloom corn can be quite a bit more expensive. So I've heard numbers for Kentucky corn costing somewhere between 28 cents a pound up to 35 cents a pound. That beautiful corn that I was telling you about that I took a picture of cost $16 a pound. 16. So we're talking, you know, a situation where the grain that's being used to make the whiskey in some instances costs 60 times as much money as the grain that they're using in Kentucky. So if you ask me, if it costs 60 times as much, it damn well better taste different, and it damn well better have more flavor. Okay. And so that's grain. Let's talk about the fermentation process. Most, if not all, major Kentucky distilleries use a sour mash process, and they ferment to somewhere around 3 days. So they make their distiller's beer, however they make it. They put it in their fermenting tanks. Often their fermenting tanks are open air tanks. And they do so with a little bit of spit mash from a previous batch. And they do that to adjust the pH to make the yeast happy so that they'll get to work and they'll really eat up those sugars quite quickly. There's one major Texas distillery, Balcones, that actually does not use a sour mash process. They use a sweet mash process. But the reason why they use a sweet mash process is because they believe that it produces a fuller flavor in their final product. But it also means that they have to have almost double the fermenting tanks because it takes their fermenting time from 3 days to 7 days. So again, if you're going to use a production process that drastically increases your cost of production, it damn well better taste different. It damn well better have more flavor. And if you're going to spend, and I don't know how much those fermenting tanks are, but I saw them and they were, you know, a sight to see. I mean, they were like 2.5 stories tall or something like that, like triple jacketed or something, temperature controlled, you know, all of this stuff. I mean, I'm sure they were very expensive. I can't imagine that it was less than $500,000 to have these extra tanks. And they did it because they believed that that extra time was going to produce a flavor that you would enjoy as a consumer. So that's the fermentation. Let's talk about the still. So far, all of the distilleries that I've gone to had a pot still instead of a column still. So in Kentucky, all of the major distilleries use a continuous feed process with a column still, where the distiller's beer gets pumped into the top of the still, and as it works its way down through the column, there's these plates, and it's heated from the bottom, and as it works its way down, it strips out the alcohols from the vapors, and then once it gets to the bottom, they've stripped out all the alcohol, and the mash is spent. That's a very efficient process, but it does remove some of the fusel oils and other things that produce flavor in whiskey. And it's the reason why the column stills never caught on in other countries. It's an industrialized way to make whiskey. In Texas, all of the distilleries that I visited use a pot still, the old style of doing it, which means that, and this is very important. Have you ever heard the phrase, I can't tell heads nor tails of that? That is actually a distiller's term, because when you're distilling the new make whiskey that's coming off the still, has three sections: the head, the heart, and the tail. And what you want is the heart. That's the good part. That's got all of the good alcohol in it that we want to put into the barrel. The head and the tails have other compounds in them that are actually not safe for humans to drink. And so when you hear about, people going blind from drinking moonshine, that's usually because they're drinking the heads, and that has acetone in it, and that will cause macular degeneration. So when you drink whiskey made on a column still, there's no way for them to make what they call the cuts, where they separate out the head, the heart, and the tail. It all just goes in together. The reason why you don't get sick is because it's such a small percentage, as when compared to the total amount of volume that they're putting in the bottle, that it's not harmful to you, but it also might increase the probability of you getting a hangover if you drink a large quantity of still produced whiskey, or if you drank any quantity of head or heart whenever the cuts were done wrong on a pot still, which is the reason why you can home brew beer, but you're not allowed to home distill, because it's so easy to blow your still up and kill yourself, or to make a product that was actually dangerous to drink that could actually be, make people sick. So the stills are quite different, and the process is way more expensive to make money in a pot still, because you have to run it in sessions. You can't run it continuously. And also there's a limit in production size that the column stills don't have. So again, if you're going to have a very expensive production process that's old school, that's purposely leaving, stripping out the compounds that you don't want and purposely leaving in some of the fusel oils and things that you do want, then, it damn well better taste different because it's much, much more expensive to produce. So hold on, what was the next thing? So the next thing is, and I didn't know this, everybody gets all excited about Michter toasted barrel, but a lot of people don't get super excited about like Woodford double oak. Well, those taste similar because it's a similar process. And International Stave is the company that makes most of the barrels all throughout the world for the wine and the spirits industry. And they actually have two cooperages that make barrels, and they're both in Lebanon, but one is Lebanon, Kentucky, and one is Lebanon in some other state. And one of them makes barrels for the whiskey industry, and the other one makes barrels for the wine industry. Well, they have an amazing research and development department, and they started doing tests on barrels that what happens if we don't just char the barrel? What happens if we bring the barrel up to a certain temperature, hot enough for it to force chemical reactions to take place in the wood, but not so hot that it burns it, right? That's called toasting. And so what we're used to is a charred oak container, right? Because we've all read those regulations. But there's something else that International Stave has developed, and they won't exactly tell you how they're doing it because it's proprietary technology, but they have systems that they use to heat a barrel up to a certain temperature and hold it there for a certain amount of time, because their R&D has shown them that when you do that, it causes a chemical reaction. And there's a compound in oak called vanillin, and it's where we get vanilla from, right? That compound, vanillin. And that toasting process causes vanillin and cocoa flavors and other flavors that they can isolate that are naturally in wood, and they can pull those out. And so as far as I know, all of the Texas distilleries that I've gone to are using some sort of a toasting process, whether it's a wave stave process where the char process toast parts of the barrel and chars parts of the barrel, or they're actually buying wine barrels like they do at Balcones because they've gone through a toasting process. In addition, two of the distilleries that I went to shared with me that they use various types of oak. So it's a misconception that in the United States, you have to use American oak barrels. That's actually not true. The regulations say it has to be an oak container. The reason why we're not using oak boxes or whatever is because whiskey is very reactive with iron. And so if you made a container that had to be held together with glue or iron, it would interact with that glue and iron and it would ruin the whiskey. Barrels don't need any glue or nails or anything like that to hold them together. That's what makes them safe to store whiskey in, and that's why we use barrels. But it does not have to be made out of an American oak barrel. And two of the distilleries that I interviewed said that they occasionally use European oak, which might be Hungarian, and sometimes they use French oak. Now, the regular U.S. oak barrels that they use cost them somewhere around $300 after toasting. You could get them cheaper if you didn't go through the specialty process of wave, stave, or toasting. But some of the European barrels cost $600, $700, $800, and some of the French oak barrels can cost $1,000 or $1,200. So think about that. Again, if you're buying a material that's going into your production process and it costs up to 4 times as much money because it's supposed to impart, larger, bolder flavors, it damn well better taste different, right? If you're spending all of that extra money. So now that we've talked about the barrels, let's talk about the temperature difference. So obviously it can get pretty hot in Kentucky, but it can get pretty even hotter here in Texas. And heat causes evaporation. And so that can be an issue for the distiller because, we all know that barrels are, kind of living things, and they lose part of their volume every year to something we call Angel's share. And it's just basically evaporation. Well, in Scotland, because the temperature is, more consistent, they only lose between 1.5% and 2% per year to the Angel's share. So in Scotland, they can age for, say, 40 years and still expect to have roughly 20% of their original product. In Kentucky, they lose between 3 and 7% per year, depending on, the style of warehouse. Is it brick facade or is it metal? And so like Buffalo Trace tells you 3 to 5. So if you're losing 3 to 5% per year and you decide that you're going to do a 12-year, Weller product, a WL Weller 12-year, right? 5%, you still should have 40% of your product on average after that 12 years or more. But in Texas, the distilleries that are far up north, like Iron Root, that's almost in Oklahoma, they're losing 7 to 9% per year. The distilleries that are way further south, closer to the Gulf, they might be losing as much as 17% per year. So think about that. If you're losing an average of, say, 12 to 15% per year to Angel share in your state, could you produce a 12-year whiskey? Of course you couldn't. And so too many of us get caught up on age statements. But understand that the aging process is just supposed to impart flavor into the whiskey that are positive flavors. If you've ever had an overaged whiskey, they taste bitter, acidic, tannic, and it's not good. And you taste nothing of the grain. The grain is gone. Which brings me to my next point. Recently, Buffalo Trace did a huge, experimental, process, and they tested all different types of things, and they kept all the data for it. And what was eventually discovered was that in Kentucky, the barrel and the maturation process, how they age the whiskey, is responsible for roughly 70% of the flavor that ends up in your glass, right? And so if that's the case, and we're not able to age we start off with completely different distillate from completely different grain, but we also are using completely different preparation for our barrels. We're buying barrels that have oak from other countries that are by their nature supposed to impart different flavors. And then we have to age differently because we lose more to Angel share. Of course, it's not going to taste the same. And so the reason why I want you to get excited about Texas whiskey, I'm not telling you that Kentucky whiskey is not good. We all know that it is. We've trained our palates to like it and to know what's good and what's not good. But it is a barrel-focused spirit. Texas whiskey is a grain-focused spirit, okay? And it's totally okay to taste a grain, especially when it costs 60 times as much and they're using a more difficult, expensive process to produce it. And don't get caught up on the age statements, right? Now, there are chemical reactions that take place in a barrel over time, and Texas whiskeys will never be able to pull those flavors out because there's certain chemical reactions that have been proven scientifically you cannot speed them up. And so Texas has abandoned the pursuit of those particular flavors being pulled out with time and decided to pursue flavors that they can achieve with our local grain processes and temperature. Okay. And again, that is why it tastes different. Another thing that I found out that was very interesting is in addition to the chemical reactions that take place over time, one of the other factors isn't just interaction with the barrel, because we get way more interaction with the barrel than they do in Kentucky because it gets so hot here and it pushes the whiskey so deep into the wood so quickly. But it also has to do with interaction with the liquid and the oxygen that's in the barrel, because as the angel share escapes, oxygen is now inside the barrel, and that oxygen is going to chemically react with the whiskey, commonly referred to as oxidization. Too much oxidization is bad, but you get, a slow, steady stream of it when you age for a longer period of time and there's that air in that barrel. Most barrels have 24 to 32 staves in it. So if you've watched any of the documentaries, you'll hear that. But because we don't have the time to get as much oxidization as some of the distillers would like, one distillery in particular, Balcones, I'm wearing their t-shirt today, has decided to pay extra money to have their barrels made with extra staves, because that research that Buffalo Trace did revealed that the air that's getting into the barrel isn't coming in through the wood, it's coming in through the slats, the spaces where the staves come together. So logically, if you have more staves, you're going to have more opportunity for air to get into the barrel. And so in Balcones, they have 38 to 42 staves in their barrels so that they get all the oxidization, which can be sped up, even though they're not able to get the other chemical reactions that take time. The last component that I want to talk about is water. And so when you go to Kentucky, they make a really big deal about their water, right? We have limestone filtered water, and it takes out all of the iron, and whiskey and iron aren't friends. And we also believe that that's why our horses are so strong and we have the fastest horses in the world and blah, blah, blah. We've all heard all of that. The truth is that there is no distillery that's putting groundwater into their whiskey. Everybody filters their water. And the filtration systems that have been developed at this point are so sophisticated, you could probably be getting water out of a dirty toilet, filter it, and it would be perfectly the same as the water that's filtered out of Kentucky. And there are some distillers in Kentucky that'll be honest about that. Then on the tour, they're going to make a big deal about their water source. But the truth is, with the filtration, it wouldn't matter where the water came from. You could probably start with salt water and it wouldn't make a difference. Okay. And so, yeah, we may not have the same water that they do there to start with, but we do to end with. So that kind of clears up some of the differences. The other thing I want to address is that a lot of people will complain that Texas whiskeys are too expensive, and that they would rather buy a much cheaper product that they feel like has a flavor that they prefer. And I can kind of understand that, because most premium Texas whiskeys start off at the $60 range and kind of go up from there. But it's not like these distilleries are. I hope that is not screwing up the recording. It's not like these distilleries are, just raking in the cash. Iron Root's been in business for years. Both the Licorice brothers drive, decent pickup trucks, but it's not like they're rolling around in a Bugatti or a Lamborghini or something, right? I mean, they're not making that much money. In fact, this is the first year that they hope to get profitable, that they can actually pay themselves for working at the distillery. That's a big deal, right? This is a passion. These are people who have poured their life into making something that's new and unique. And then we whiskey snobs don't take the time to learn about it, snub our noses at it and go, it doesn't taste like Kentucky bourbon, right? So that's part of the reason why I'm doing this. Now, I do have a couple of different whiskeys here that I want to do a live review of. So this first one is from Balcones. I did end up getting a glass from there when I was down there. And I did a barrel pick that was advertised. The tasting opportunity to be on a tasting panel was advertised on DFW Whiskey Club through David Burgos. Thank you. And it was for Plump Jacks in San Francisco. And they do ship to Texas. So when this comes out, y'all will be able to buy this. At tastings, there's a bunch of half-empty glasses that are lying around. And so Ray Tay taught me to pour them all in one glass and make an infinity glass of all of your barrels that you selected from. And often it's pretty good. The sum of the parts is sometimes greater than the whole. So that's what this is. This was an infinity glass of the 7 barrels that we tried when we were down at Balcones. So I want to do a little live review. So first off, this is a single malt. So most of what we're used to from Balcony, so I mean, most people know that they have a single malt, but they have two production processes, and they actually have two separate mash cookers. They have two separate mills. They mill the grain different depending on what kind of, whether it's a malted barley or it's corn. They put in the mash tun different. I mean, everything's different. So you kind of got to respect that they're putting in that much effort so that they're staying true to the production processes. But what I get on this is a ton of maple syrup and cinnamon. Like if there were a cinnamon maple syrup, that's what this would be. Okay, so let's taste it. And it tastes just like it smells. But there is a I went camping with my son a few weeks ago, and we gathered up a bunch of oak, like scrub oak that had like fallen off the tree and stuff, and we used that for our firewood, and we cooked our food with it. And the smoke that was coming off there was so sweet smelling to me, and there's a ton of that in here. And of course, vanilla for days, just vanilla for days. Some chocolate as well, and I believe that's from the toasting that they have, and like I said, tons of cinnamon. Now, one other thing that I get on their malted product on some of them is sometimes I taste a little bit of like, have you ever been eating like breakfast and there were like pancakes with syrup and then like some bacon, and like the bacon got in the syrup and you ate it anyway because it's bacon? There's a little bit of a maple bacon flavor on the finish on this too, which is kind of interesting. But all in all, we're talking about, if I were going to rate like the volume, the intensity of flavor for that whiskey compared to the average Kentucky whiskey, it's 200% of intensity of flavor, at least, maybe more, right? And it's supposed to be, people, supposed to be. All right. So this next whiskey that I have is this is from Iron Root Distillery. Marsha, the mother of Texas bourbon. If you watch this, just know that I respect you as the first lady of Texas bourbon. Even though your nickname is the mother of Texas bourbon, she literally is like the mother of all the distillers. Like if you bring up Marsha at another distillery, the head distiller will get like, googly eyes because, everybody loves her so much. But the Licorice Brothers produced this, and this is 100% corn whiskey, but you cannot tell. Okay. So, you know what? This one is a little bit oxidized, and I'm going to explain why in a second. This is not typical. If you go in and you buy an Iron Root, you're not going to get this. Okay. And I'll explain why in a second. But this whiskey in Texas, blue corn whiskeys or, heirloom corn whiskeys, they're like the everything bagel of bourbons or whiskeys. Sometimes they're just corn whiskeys because they have refill barrels. Sometimes they're technically bourbons, even if they're 100% corn, because the blend of barrels was all new, unused barrels. But what I can say is that you could say any descriptor: blood orange, pineapple, peaches, chocolate, leather. It doesn't matter. It's in there. You can't be wrong. There is so much complexity and flavor in this whiskey. I tried one of their whiskeys like 3-4 weeks ago after I found out that I was going to do this tasting, and I snubbed my nose at it, people, because I wasn't paying attention. And so I want you to let your tongues do the evaluating and not your minds, because this whiskey has bold, intense flavors from beginning to end. You want to talk about finishes? These Texas whiskeys, I mean, they're long distance runners, people, because they're made in a pot still. So they retain a lot of those oily characteristics that contribute to a long finish. all of these are bottled at a high proof, so they don't have to be chill filtered, and they usually aren't, because the distillers here in Texas believe that leaving those fatty, acids in there are going to add to the flavor profile of the whiskey. And you all know that you're clamoring to get non-chill filtered OWA for some reason, right? Well, most Texas whiskeys, especially the high proof ones, are non-chill filtered. And so, there's another reason why they have a big, bold flavor with a long finish. And it's because that oil is coating your mouth and it's not going anywhere, right? Most of these are super thick, super thick. And so, anyways, that's kind of the, reviews. I'm going to post this up on several Facebook groups. I hope that you made it through to the end. And my call to action to you people is I want you to go out and get a Texas whiskey. DFW Whiskey Club has 3 barrels picked from Lone Elm. Lone Elm Distillery. I went out there. I interviewed Brandon, the distillery manager. Their products are amazing. I swear to God, I thought that their whiskey, which is a 95% wheat whiskey, I swear to God, I thought it was finished in port barrels because it had so much like dried raisiny fruit flavor in it. But I mean, it was big, bold, delicious, just like this. Oily as all get out, just like this. And so DFW Whiskey Club has 3 barrels that are coming. So be on the lookout. If you're in that club, be on the lookout for that. If you ever get a chance to try Lone Elm, do it. None of their products were bad. Beautiful, sweet smoke flavor on the finish. I don't have any of their product here right now, or I would have done it too. And go out and get a Lone Elm, get a Iron Root, get a Balcones. Basically, if you want information about who the legit Texas producers are, go to texaswhiskeytrail.com, and every distillery that's on the Texas Whiskey Trail is grain to glass. They're trying to source their grains from the state of Texas, except for the malted barley that Balcones uses. It comes from Scotland, even though it's not peated. But they do have a peated one coming out. If you're into that sort of thing, I am not. So buy one of these products, and I want you to pour yourself a glass and treat it like you just opened up a Pappy 23 and pay attention. I want you to try to break down those smells and break down those flavors. And I promise you, if you're not a horse's ass, by the time you get done evaluating that whiskey, you're going to have to admit something to yourself. And that is, it is a thick, oily, complex whiskey that you maybe were snubbing your nose at for no good reason. So the shift is coming. People are looking for new ways to get high quality premium spirits to drink. Some people are switching to rums. Some people are switching to brandies. Sooner or later, people are going to figure it out, and they're going to switch to Texas whiskeys because they're amazing and they have great flavor. So, and a lot of these are sweet enough that you can give them to somebody who's not an avid whiskey drinker, almost like giving Angel's Envy rye to somebody who doesn't drink a lot of whiskey because it's so palatable. It's like that. And so get ahead of the curve, people. Be a part of the movement that's coming and get out there and start buying some Texas whiskey and be on the lookout, because I know that, and I didn't explain why that one was so oxidized. So Bobby Carroll, Bobby Carroll is, and Angels may be getting some of the Lone Elm, and I think Big Country might be getting some of the Lone Elm. Empire Liquor is getting 2 barrels of Iron Root. One of them is going to be released as is right up front. But Iron Root does a really cool barrel program called an Evolution Cask. And they release the whiskey in fourths. So each cask has about 200 bottles in it. So you get about 50 bottles on each release. But every time they take a quarter out, they don't fill it back up with anything. So now it's got that extra oxygen in there, and they let it age for an extra 6 months, which is a lot in this Texas heat, because most Texas whiskeys are going to be, 2 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 5.5. But that's really, really getting up there. That's like a Pappy 23 level in terms of, Angel Share Loss. So there's a second barrel that Bobby very graciously allowed the tasting panel to pick. Thank you so much, Bobby, for everything you're doing for the whiskey community. and that is going to be released in fourths. And so I'm a little bit worried about that one because I want a bottle of each of the evolutions so that I can taste them side by side and see what they do over time. But there's only going to be about 50 people who get to buy that. And the store's going to want some, the club's going to want some. And so, be on the lookout for that. And then, I know that you can always go out and you can get Balcones. So, maybe pick up one of the Balcones True Blues, maybe one of the single malts. If you like Scotch, you might like the single malt a little bit more. Check that out. And of course, Plump Jacks is going to be coming out with that barrel pick, and they claim that they'll be able to ship those bottles to Texas. So those are the three that I know of that are coming out. But don't let those hold you back. Go into your local store, find a nice bottle, and buy it and take it home and enjoy it. So if you have any questions, I'm going to post this link up in the page, so you can just throw a comment in the comment section, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. Talk to you soon. Bye.